Welcome to this 7th Silk Road Cultural Belt video conference. And let me first give a bit of context. During a breakfast at the BMW Foundation in Berlin in the beginning of August, we had a short conversation about cages.
Cages, yeah.
Positive forms of limitation in relation to the term freedom. So this was the starting point of really an interesting, very short conversation, but we decided to continue this conversation here in the context of two ideas. First, the idea of the Silk Road Cultural Belt, a narrative for Europe. And second, the idea of a European Silk Road as proposed by Dr. Mario Holzner, Philipp Heimberger, and Artem Kochnev in Vienna last year in July. And when we think about cages, like definitions where we limit ourselves to certain personal views, question, how do you understand these two ideas in the context of positive forms of limitation, like starting from our starting point at the balcony at BMW Foundation, but putting it in the context of these two ideas?
I think that limitations are absolutely, I almost said necessary, but they are also so much like a part of reality. You will always have limitations, and I've written about the limitations as a cage because I think it's a very it's an honest way of putting it, because limitations always have a negative side as well. And realizing that and accepting that we can't do anything without limitations. We are human beings in a physical form. We have a lifespan that is we don't know how long it will be, but that is a limitation as well. So the physical body, the economy, everything. So we are entities with limitations, and accepting that is maybe the first step towards choosing our own cages, because there will be cages. I hope that was sort of an answer.
It's a starting point from a very I really like the metaphor you chose and proposed, because there's this element of in the context of for example defined formulations. When we speak, like we have for example, as I said, the Silk Road Cultural Belt as an idea, as a metaphor, or as a narrative with certain images, or the plan of a European Silk Road, it's an economical plan as proposed by Mario Holzner. And if we are playing with metaphors, like cage or a conference of the birds, or even a Silk Road as a certain cage, or as a definition, or as a defined formulation, when it comes to formulations, you as a writer, you are working every day on formulations and how to formulate, how to find a defining formulation for your thoughts, for your ideas, for your convictions. But bring it in this concrete context. Like what role do defined formulations play for you in this context, when we have two very concrete ideas?
That's interesting. You find when what I know most about is storytelling, basically. And as a writer, you find the limitations within writing, the limitations within storytelling there are limitations with the language. You'll come to certain limitations within the language. which is hard, and a lot of the writing is concerned with getting around those limitations. So that's one thing. Another thing is limitations within. Will you refresh the question? Is limitations of defining things? Yes, that when you define things, those are limitations as well. Ideas, words, sentences.
Like to have a frame, to set a certain, to have a certain, a certain limitation inside a definition or a certain frame in a narrative. You know, where you limit yourself to certain metaphors. Or in a plan, in an economical plan, where you also have to prioritize. You have to put something first, something second. And
so this is so important. This is what it's all about, basically. Realizing that you have to make definitions, realizing that you have to that these definitions will be they will be extremely limiting towards what you're going to do. But if you are not, it's about making choices. And every choice you make will be in a certain direction, and there will be pathways you won't be able to take afterwards. So you will have to continue forward, and you will have to accept that this is what it's about. It's about making choices. It's about, sometimes I get the feeling that a good leader is not maybe the person that is the most suitable for leading, but the only guy who's willing to say, well, we're going to go down this road and this might lead to catastrophe, but somebody has to make the choice, basically.
And when we are thinking about the goal, for example, like to involve European citizens, you know, when we have a wide discussion, for example, on an idea like a European Silk Road or a European Silk Road perspective, as a very concrete frame, as a concrete plan, as a concrete, you could call it cage, you know, in relation to certain values, in relation to certain ethical norms, for example. Question, which approach or what kind of approach or which questions would you raise and include if we are thinking of a wide discussion?
That is a bit wide question. Let me put it this way. And let me put it this way. I think that, and this is me going back to what I know a little about, which is storytelling. I think that it's all about, okay, you see a guy swimming, basically. You see this guy who's swimming. And you don't really know why he's swimming, because there could be several reasons for him to swim. He could be, and this could be a story, this could be basically real life, but as a metaphor, you see this guy swimming, and maybe he wants to be the best swimmer in the world. Or maybe he had a car accident, and this is his way of trying to get back into shape, trying to reconnect with his body. These are positives. These are positive reasons for him to be swimming. But he might also be swimming because he doesn't want to get eaten by a shark, you know. So this is what I find very important about the narrative, what we are doing, where we are moving, or what we are moving towards as a collection of countries with a European identity, or as individuals. Are we, and this is also connected to the whole cage idea, you are moving in one direction, you are swimming, but are you trying to escape from the shark, or are you trying to become the best swimmer in the world? And if you get to choose to not try to escape from the shark, but choose to make this not a tragedy, but maybe a comedy or something positive. And I think a lot of people within their cages think they are moving forwards towards a goal, but they're actually trying to escape from something, maybe just failure.
Interesting.
a degradation or yeah. Mm.
And I mean, it's a beautiful beautiful idea to think like that when you have an idea, when you're on the very beginning of a white piece of paper, like I mean, there is this open page of a so-called European Silk Road perspective. No, it's still a piece of possibility of I mean, there is a plan, but still there is also the chance to involve as many people as possible into a discussion of what this term could be and should stand for. And that's the context of of my interest, because I like to participate or to bring intensity to a question which still has a very, very open spectrum, which is still very, very, which is not a cage yet, which is not narrowly defined yet. So which is still, with your metaphor, which is really swimming, because there is a huge expectation, or there are huge demands, there are huge, very deep necessities.
Yes.
But to take your picture, like when you sometimes like in this context, you don't know whether you're running away from something or already moving towards a really for example to a discovery. And I mean, a discussion we have, like when we take our discussion, or not even discussion, but exchange of views. When we want to involve others, how do you, I mean, from storytelling, using this picture of swimming, I mean, it's also a beautiful way, like to be very open, to be very direct, that this idea is still swimming. It's still not closed. It's not a cage yet. And we want to involve as many people as possible into this process of defining this idea.
So building the cage. But
exactly.
Building the cage we want to live within, basically. Maybe.
That's the challenge. That's the challenge. To find a way and a form to involve and to participate European citizens. I like this idea to involve, to really to have a wide discussion, like what could be this idea of a Silk Road, European Silk Road? Why this needs a definition, and where do we have to be careful that it doesn't become a cage, like a.
And that in the negative sense. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that we're also talking about here like a common agreed upon narrative as well. I feel.
Yes, exactly.
But within, of course, financial certain financial goals and things we might as a part of the world want to achieve, also a collective narrative. Let me tell you about I had this assignment where this is trying to keep it very much on because Europe is a very big place, so this is taking it to an extreme, kind of keeping it extremely local or very small scale, but still it's just the micro version of it. My assignment was, other writers had the same assignment here in Denmark, but mine was to go to a small town, stay there for a week, and write a small text about this place, or about my experience staying there. And I had limitations on the number of words I was allowed to. I mean, it was like half a page or something, maybe a page. It wasn't long. So that was a limitation because it needed to be short enough to be brought by a local newspaper, so the people in this town could read what I had gotten out of it, of staying there. And this is a kind of quite a few months ago. And yesterday I went back to read the text aloud to these people and get their response on this text. And this is a part of Denmark that is not maybe financially doing so well. That's with a lot of small towns around Europe, because people are moving to bigger cities and they have problems with financial problems, and small stores are dying. But basically, a man told me that one of the main issues was that they had lost their local bank. Okay, they still have banks, but all the banks now are part of chains, of course, which we see. But they used to have a local bank that was just for their very small part of Denmark. And having a small local bank made it possible for them to take loans and buy property, because they could buy property that a centralized bank wouldn't believe would be a good idea to buy. But a local bank could see the point. And he said, if we're going to survive as a community, we need to get a local bank again. And I don't think this might happen, but it's quite difficult to build a bank from scratch. But my point was, and I might be very wrong, as I told you, I come from like a storytelling point of view. But my point was that they really need to find, as a town and as a community, they need to find their own narrative. I mean, I can give them my view on what they're doing, and I like the town, but they really need for themselves. And they can't hire a guy doing advertising. They can't hire some guy from Copenhagen who's will chat them a lot and who will stay there for 2 days. They themselves need to find why their place is so special, why it's worth preserving, what their story, because you need to start with the story. You need to start with the narrative before you can get people involved in building a bank.
Yeah.
That's my point, basically. You really need to start with the, why are we here? Who are we?
And imagining the idea of Europe, I mean, again, it's we are moving now to between macro and micro and the global and local, and like it's really it's a wild wie sagt man, wilder Ritt, a wild horse, horse. But I mean, if we are imagining the idea of Europe as a Silk Road, for you personally, why does this link between, for example, quality, like silk, quality, and way of like road, way of life, way of a local narrative, of a local community defining its own idea of quality, its own idea of silk, you know, of a very personal or something very specific in a local region. Why does that make sense, or in which way would it make sense for you? I mean, just like playing with this kind of storytelling, or kind of translating this kind of metaphors.
I think it's maybe just like a basic it's a basic human necessity to be able to find what makes where you live, who you are as a person, but also as a people. as a country, maybe not even so much as a country, but as a people. Because I mean, Europe has been divided into countries, and you see culturally, you see people bridging these countries that are maybe not really where the border isn't really an end of where one people begin and the other one end. So, but I think it's a question of identity.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's a question of positive identity instead of fearing, instead of defining the identity as a negative. Well, at least we are not those people.
Yeah.
At least we're much better than those people over there. And why are we better than those people over there? Because we are not them, basically. So we're good. We're the good guys. I think that it's things cannot be okay. These are hard questions. These are hard questions to put into words. But things need definitions. Everything can't be the same. And we even if you have big cities, like Berlin, or even smaller cities like Hamburg or Copenhagen, you will within these cities you will have different neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods, they might for like a tourist seem almost the same. They're not that different, but people who live within these neighborhoods will be very, very keen on defining that this is a bohemian neighborhood, and this is the like upscale neighborhood, and this is where the socialists live, and this is where the more conservative people they prefer to live in, and because you cannot just say I live in Berlin, that's it, and Berlin is just Berlin. You need to have the sense of a small community. We're built like this.
Yeah.
It's in our DNA. We need, because if the community is too big, we won't be able to find our function within it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I live in a rather small neighborhood as well. Who am I? I'm the writer in the neighborhood. You know, this is the butcher in the neighborhood. But if we say Copenhagen, there's a lot of butchers, there's a lot of writers. Nothing means anything. Nothing is important anymore. So this is a question of how do you take something as big as Europe? And I love Europe. I really do. And I've been traveling a lot, and I keep like returning to I love experiencing the minute differences between countries in Europe as well. But how do we take something big and still, as Europe, and find a common narrative, which still and very much so also gives room for the very small and specific differences in narratives, communities within.
And the very specific quality, the very specific flavor and color and taste and smell and of the neighborhood. Exactly.
I love the fact that I can taste the difference between Czech beer and German beer. I mean, it's more or less the same tradition. I know the story behind it, but you can. The small differences are very important, and the specifics are very important.
And translating this limitation or this need or this frame of necessities into the context of a Silk Road, like again the idea of a European Silk Road, which could involve many European citizens and companies and like even it's a very large plan, or the metaphor of the Silk Road again as something which is not yet in my from my observation a metaphor which found a playful way, to be translated into this very personal, very local, very, as you explained, like very specific, all-day way of life or definition of quality, for example. Why is this? And what needs to be done, like to bring some playfulness into this, into this, some lightness, some even maybe some freedom into this, just into this metaphor of a Silk Road. I mean, there is the historical, like connotation, and then there is this new Silk Road, also an idea from China, but now the European perspective, really the playfulness, also in a democratic way, in a participative way, in an inclusive way. What is lacking, like, or what needs to be changed in our mindset, thinking of this?
I think we need to rediscover our own countries and our main and our stories and our history together, as a continent and as countries linked. And I think that I think we've been, for maybe at least 100 years, we've been trying to move away from the positive sides of Europe. I mean, we've been very, very, critique is great. Critique can at times make something better. This is how it works. But we have not been good enough at pointing out what is great about Europe, what is amazing about Europe, what is extremely beautiful, what we have done, what we have created, the sort of the peace we still have, and this was not easy. We do have I mean, so many things are going extremely wrong in the world and in Europe as well. But in a lot of ways, things have never been better than they are now. I mean, statistically, things have never been better than they are now. This is not so. I mean, we need to tell these stories, but how do we? As it is now, we have intellectuals have for much too long been very busy criticizing the Europe and the ideas behind Europe, and not been good enough at praising the beautiful aspects of Europe. And this has led to that the only people who are telling the stories are nationalists. And they tell stories that are not true, very often. And I'm not telling about how nationalists talk about foreigners. And I don't really, in this context, that's not very important for me. It might be in another context, but not in this context. It's the romanticizing, the lying and romanticizing about our history and our countries, the propaganda, basically, the lies. So we have left the praising of a European way of thinking and living. We have left that for the far right or the nationalists, and we should take that back. We should take the positive ideas of Europe back from the fringes.
I mean, as a writer from Copenhagen and from Denmark, Jonas, like, how? I mean, you mentioned it a bit in Berlin, like this to in the context of the discussion about freedom or the term freedom. How does Europe feel to you in Denmark? I mean, Denmark is in the democracy index number 5 in the world. So really, there is some real awareness or some clarity that peace itself are like this calming effect of peace, you know, like of calming of a society, of a calmed or calming down in a positive way system itself has many positive effects, and that society and the majority of people want to strengthen this form of peace. So how does that how does Europe feel for you, like in your in this city?
I get the feeling that, and this is also speaking from like a very personal level, I get the feeling that we do have one issue. We do have one issue which is not about the state of Europe, but it's about the state of the people in Europe, and that is that we are, as a species, we are we're kind of wired for catastrophe. So when things become too peaceful, we will start looking for what's wrong. And if we don't really find anything that's so terribly wrong on the street right now, we might find it within ourselves. I mean, people are taking pills like it's crazy at these times. People have. I mean, I had a period of kind of, I'd say, mental instability. You could call it stress, but that's so undramatic. So mental instability, you could say that as well. And I mean, if I were to look at my basic surroundings at the time, they were fine. I drove myself crazy basically writing a book, goddammit. I mean, you shouldn't be, I mean, that is what you do when there's not any war around you and the neighborhood you live in is pretty safe and you got okay money to write, and then everything. You drive yourself crazy because you are not really defining what the fight is, but you still feel like there should be a fight because you're nervous.
Interesting.
Your nervous system is overreacting because of the peace.
Interesting. So in the sense, like that, the confidence actually in the state of, in the peaceful state of mind, even in a peaceful state of society, is, I mean, in Norway, as the country in being number one in the world in democracy, there is some even deeper confidence that this is, that the positive advantages and the positive effects of the pragmatism or a pragmatic approach to realize this kind of views, or even again this kind of cage, this kind of definitions, this kind of defining formulations. So it's fascinating what you're observing and describing. And I just want to translate this again into this specific context of from our starting point. Like, again, when we think of the European democracy, taking Denmark, taking a city like Copenhagen, taking your observation as an example. So if we think of the European democracy as a Silk Road, again, like a very deeply connotated term, even taking it a step further, thinking of it as a Silk Road between the universe and planet Earth. Now it's getting wild.
I love it. I love it. Keep it coming.
So really, to leave all the other possible cages or possible definitions for a moment out from this white piece of paper. Question: what could be the great advantages to think in such terms?
I think the necessity of common and joint and mutual joining narrative is, I mean, saying using the term Silk Road with as many connotations as it have. This is a way of starting a narrative, a way of thinking of Europe, or a way of thinking of a movement forward in and for Europe. So it's like with the bank, you need to start with the ideas, you need to start with the story, and then you might be able to move forward. So I see it as a rather beautiful metaphor for joining. And an interesting thing about roads are that they're man-made, basically, or they could be like animals could have made them walking towards water, but basically, you know, they're man-made, and they are like one of the first steps of civilization. That's a road. You have a road, so you might not be eaten by wolves, and you have a road that will make it easier to get from one town to another. So you have a road, and a road will connect places. That's important. That is very, very important. A road connects places, and a road is also static in the way that you don't really move a road around. It's there. It's like a base. But it's also meant to be traveled. So you also by using the word road, you have the idea of movement. And maybe this is the hard part, but also what I think makes the Silk Road, because then you also, if you say Silk Road, you also have like an idea of this is something good, you know? This is something we appreciate. This is something that has a value in itself, the Silk Road. But maybe this is a very good metaphor for what could be a way of looking at Europe and a way of moving forward. That is that you have something that is connecting, like a road. You have something that is static in its form, it's there. You don't change it, it's there. You don't want to change it. You don't want to change it just to change it. But still, what it does is that it allows movement. I mean, we can, because basically, how do we do this? How do we have movement in Europe without giving up on what is already there, the past, the basics, the bases of the different countries, the different flavors, the different cultures in Europe? We don't want to say, okay, we want movement for movement's sake. We want to keep what's good. And to some extent, we want to keep remembering what's bad as well, and not throw that out as well, because we might learn something from it.
But to get back to our starting term, like what you introduced, the idea of this again, the cage as a picture, and I thought about it in the context of a narrative, like the Silk Cultural Belt, for example, like where there are certain key images or key ideas, key metaphors are put into one form, and that was a limitation also. But another hard question for me personally, like when we take the word cage, like what would be the cage of ethical and moral limitations we need to take into consideration in our terms of freedom, for example, like kindness and and gratitude. Again, when we have a narrative, a cage, a road, silk, and we need to, or we understand, or we decided to take into consideration certain moral and ethical limitations or an ethical cage. How is this, like the image of the road, you know, like where is the how would you what is again the positive side of the cage?
This is so difficult. I'll try to answer your question, but this is not an easy question.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
the hardest question ever.
I don't have the answer, you know. It's just the ongoing process.
I think that because ethics and morality, these issues are so extremely important. And how do we define them? And how do we explain their necessity? I mean, necessity, it's easy to say that you shouldn't kill people because that'll be bad for society, but hey, what's that to me, basically? This is one of the things that needs to be worked out, because we used to have religion as a way of defining. We used to have religion as a way of defining what was good or bad, as I see it. We used to have religion saying and giving us like ethical guidelines. Maybe not guidelines, maybe more like if you didn't follow them, you would get your head chopped off. But basically, you had the collective narrative of religion defining what was good and bad, and we don't. Then you had the ideologies trying to do the same, but with horrible consequences. So, I mean, I'm no expert at all, but when you have a set of ethics and you don't ask the questions why they're that important, and you don't refresh their importance, they have a tendency to become like structures we don't. They become like cages in the worst possible sense, because they do limit us. But we have no way of seeing the good in them. And also, you have a lot of rules in society, and some of these rules will time prove to be unuseful and harmful even. So we need to keep it fresh. We need to remind ourselves why these ideas of ethics, of basic ethics, why they are important. And we can never just say, well, because it seems kind of obvious that you shouldn't do this, and it seems kind of obvious that you should do this. If we start off saying, well, this is a given, we will surely fail, I think.
I mean, it's fascinating that what I find fascinating in this context is that when we are contextualizing, or even, I mean, reflecting on the idea of a Silk Road, or this Silk Road, or now the European Silk Road, then we are, of course, facing the question like, where's the end of a road, of a one-way road or a two-way road? And this is what I see personally as a great chance for a European Silk Road, or what I believe is a very, very important part of the Silk Road cultural belt itself too. Is where is the compatibility, you know, like, and to really be very, very honest that there is, when it is a European perspective, there is maybe in the vertical, you know, in a vertical Silk Road, there is full compatibility, you know, like but on a horizontal Silk Road, there must be a very honest position that there is only certain, with certain conditions, there will be ethical and moral compatibility. So to find the right formulation again, or the right cage, to be very, very clear with that is a hard. It's as you say, it needs to be refreshed. It needs to be permanently asked. It needs to be reframed and always be questioned. I think so too. Jonas, one last question. If we imagine a European Silk Road, yes, or a European Union as a conference of the birds, what could that mean? Each other's best qualities. As a Silk Road cultural belt, as a very literally as a belt, and the basic position which we want to inspire is responsible listeners.
Yes.
Question: what implications does this include in our work and in our families, and maybe last but not least towards our children?
You need to not rephrase it, but repeat it. The question. I wanna make sure that I got it right.
Well, taking the metaphor to a next step, like to really, we can take the European Union or even the European Silk Road on a macro level as a big object, as a subject. And then imagining this big object as a conference of the birds. Again, it's a metaphor with multi-dimensional, multi-vectoral. And then this object has a basic position. For example, the position of responsible listeners. A person, which is not just listening, but responsibly. For example, listening whether there is a moral and ethical compatibility. And take responsibility for that, for example.
I like the idea. I like the concept of a responsible listener. Let me just interject this here. I like the idea that it's a responsible receiver of something. Because we have a lot of, it's a bit of turning it around, because usually you are responsible for what you put out into the world. I like the idea that you're also responsible of what you receive.
Interesting.
To the extent that you can turn on and off your stereo or go to a concert, but you have a certain responsibility as well. Instead of just saying it is always the creators or the artists the artists who are the responsible parts in this.
And again, to take this very hybrid, or fluid idea of, for example, a Silk Road cultural belt, again as a belt, and translating it into a very direct quality in a relationship to another person, like imagining the other or another person as a conference of the birds, as some, as a multiple amount of qualities of possibilities. Again, a very, very open approach. When it comes, this was the question: what implication does this include in our work and in our families? For example, towards children. Like, in the sense, would you imagining telling to your child, compose your Silk Road, because you are an entire conference of the birds?
What I really believe in. I have a son who's 13, and I know you have one or two children.
One daughter.
Yes, and she's not very old, is she?
No, just 4 weeks.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I truly believe that we lead by example when it comes to children. So we could discuss how to raise a child successfully, otherwise, for a very long time. And it would be also, it would always be about, like setting up boundaries, giving them enough love, so forth, and a lot of different ideas, but much more so. Are you happy what you're doing? Are you taking responsibility? Are you living up to your own potential? That's what you're supposed to show your child. You can't be like a miserable sucker and say, but I'm not very happy. I drink and smoke too much, but you shouldn't do that, hon. You let me tell you how you should live your life, and let me try to give you the right frames while I'm over here drinking half a bottle of vodka and smoking cigarettes. But you go play with your perfect, very expensive wooden toys while I'm doing this. I really believe that the first thing you have to do is try to take responsibility for yourself when you raise a child, and that is very hard to do. It's much easier to tell a child what they're supposed to do than to take responsibility for yourself. That's my basic idea of raising children, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this question really consciously in the context of, of sometimes of the challenge, and to summarize, like if we are, I mean, you as a writer, me as a musician, if we are playing with metaphors, we are sometimes playing with extremes, and that sometimes is perceived as not serious at all, because it's a naive, in a certain sense, view on the world, very, very open, like children. And it's a big challenge to connect that with the responsibility, to keep the playfulness, to keep it fresh, to keep it open, and to translate it into an idea into concrete ideas, like the European Silk Road, which is just starting to be defined, and which is just starting to be discussed in all over Europe, and it's fascinating to for me. It's just important to include the perspective of children.
It is, of course it is, of course it is.
And thank you for your. I mean, no, it's really the example starts, and there the responsibility is there.
If I might return to the idea of if what we are doing, I'm a writer, your conductor, is this important in the world we live in? What we're doing, does it really make sense? Should we be doing something that is more like direct, in a sense of changing the world, if we want to change the world? And I've struggled with these ideas. What really gave me, this is not very clever, this is so basic, but what really gave me a feeling of the importance of what we're doing. yeah, we can say that, the importance, it's just us here, is that I keep returning to cave paintings. I keep returning to cave paintings because these things were done at a time where you couldn't store food in cans. So you went hunting, and then you brought the dead animal home, and then you ate it. And that was like a successful day, And you ate the animal as for as long as you could, and then you had to go hunt another animal. And if you didn't catch anything, if you didn't hunt down an animal, you and everybody around you and your family would die. And this was not just like, well, damn, this shouldn't have happened. This happened all the time. People died from starvation. It wasn't like unlucky or anything like that, not catching a prey animal. It was the norm. People died. It took hundreds and thousands of years for the population to grow over a certain amount of people worldwide, because people kept dying because they didn't catch that animal. And cave painting, the idea is that even though it was so easy for people to die, they still took the time to make these paintings.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just need the food, they also needed the story of the good hunt, of them as a people. They couldn't live without that. And I'm quite sure that music as well was like maybe the first art form, because music and the heartbeat, the drum, the heartbeat, you know. And also music can bring people together. So these art forms were these are not. That's what I'm trying to say. Art is not a luxury. It is basic necessity for the human soul. I'm quite sure.